Hey everyone, this is Fritz Nelson. You're listening to the Grow Wire podcast. I'm joined today by our producer, Kendall Fisher.
Hello.
This episode brings venture capitalist and co-founder of Bonfire Ventures, Mark Mullen. You know, we didn't ask him what Bonfire, why it was named that. I wish I did. Well, okay.
I feel like he got into the story of how it was created, but I guess he didn't really talk about the name.
I'm always curious about names.
Me too.
It's a good name, though.
Names and titles of books and especially headlines.
Oh, yeah.
Fritz really picks apart my headlines, you guys.
Yeah. I love editing headlines.
Go ahead.
Well, Mark has had quite the career leading up to this point. He was a partner at Daniels & Associates. He traveled all over the world, eventually living in France and London. Where would you live?
Oh, France, 100%.
Okay.
Yeah.
Not Italy.
You know, I've never been to Italy.
Okay.
But I've been to France, been to London, been to Germany.
All right. Well, Mark was also the Chief Operating Officer of Los Angeles County, which is actually a real job. This was years ago under Mayor Villaraigosa. And he also sits on many boards, advises startups, and now he invests in early stage companies focused on B2B solutions, security, tech, software, and all of it pretty much focused on companies almost exclusively in Los Angeles.
I think that's really cool too.
We got a lot going on here in Los Angeles, even where we are in Santa Monica.
By the way, is that new, like part of the Tom Bradley International Airport called like Mayor Villaraigosa, like court? There's like an area where I'm pretty sure is named after him.
Huh. Okay. I'll have to check it out the next time I try to avoid LAX if I can.
I know, it's rough.
Well, we get into Mark's career path. We learn about that part of his life with LA County. We learn about advice that he gives to others. And we segue into his current role as a venture capitalist, the changes he's seen in the VC industry over the last several decades. He calls himself a VC agitator, and also what he looks for in companies that he wants to invest in. He's got some pretty good advice here, so stay tuned.
Yeah, entrepreneurs, listen carefully.
Yeah.
Good advice.
Here we go.
You're listening to the Grow Wire podcast, a place where you will learn the ins and outs of growing a business, running a business, or even taking your big idea, career, or personal development to the next level. It's all possible. Our host, Fritz Nelson, the editor-in-chief of GrowWire.com, will take you on an exploration of growth through candid conversations with some of the most brilliant minds in entrepreneurship, entertainment, business development, and more. Whatever your goal, we know you'll walk away with the right tools to help fuel your journey of growth.
Before we get into our conversation with LA-based VC Mark Mullen, I want to thank our sponsors over at The Second City. Want to challenge your company to innovate and elevate through laughter? Second City Works. Yes, that's Second City Works. It's the B2B side of world-famous comedy mecca, The Second City. They've helped hundreds of Fortune 1000 companies inspire better performance by using award-winning improvisation and audience-driven techniques that are powered by humor. And you know, I was talking to somebody actually today whose 13-year-old child did a Second City workshop. This person's child wants to be a stand-up comic. So
Really?
I didn't know they did it for kids.
Neither did I. But
Yeah.
it's open to, I guess it is open to everybody.
Or maybe they have a special program for kids. We should ask them about that.
Yeah. You know, I did an improv class when I was there.
Yeah, I saw a little bit of footage of that. Was it scary?
It really tests your courage. You have to really be willing to step outside of your comfort zone for sure.
Well,
but it's great.
You're a person willing to step out of your comfort zone, so you probably did well. If you're interested in live events, hands-on workshops, campaign consultation, branded content, and a whole lot more, then visit secondcityworks.com to learn more.
Boom.
I also want to make sure you head over to our blog, growwire.com. This week, we've got an awesome interview with Australian business mogul Naomi Simpson. And you actually sat down and talked to Naomi.
Yes, I did. She is incredible.
So she's with
Okay, so she's with the Big Red Group.
the Big Red. So that's why she wears red.
Well, no. She wears red, and you'll find this out on during this interview. She wears red because someone just once told her it looked good on her, and she was like, great, I don't ever have to think about what color I'm going to wear again. So she just started wearing red, and now actually she's on Shark Tank in Australia, and she's known as the Red Shark.
Ooh.
Yeah.
I would want to be the red shark.
Me too, because I love the color red. I really do.
And Kendall right now has red earrings on.
I do have red earrings on. But she talks about, she left, she worked for, Apple Australia, IBM, KPMG. She worked for some great companies in her early career. When she got pregnant, she ended up leaving and kind of doing her own thing, and then started Red Balloon, which is a company that basically gifts experiences. And the company took off, but not before some struggle period for Naomi. And she talks all about that, what she learned during that period. What I really wanted to dive into, and Fritz, we've talked about this before, is, okay, so everybody says I fell down and then I got back up, but I want to know what happens when you fall down, when you're in that challenge period and you're like, am I going to get through this? What goes through your head? Like, really, how do you pick yourself back up to keep going? She put $25,000 of her own money into this company. She had 2 young toddlers that she was raising. That's a lot to handle when starting a company, on top of not feeling like it's successful yet. But her dedication and her belief in herself is really what kind of, it's just, you just see it straight through the whole interview. That's evident, is that she basically believed in herself. She believed in the idea. So, and
you get to listen to that cool Australian accent.
Right, exactly, which I can't imitate. I'm not even going to try. No.
Yeah, I'm not good at accents either. So we'll leave it at that.
Yeah. Anyway, you can watch it this week on growwire.com.
I will. Mark, thanks for joining us. You have a long history in investing and lots of different roles, and you've lived all over the world. But I think, just kind of to set this up, like, walk us through the highlights of your career and how you got here.
Okay. Well, that long history, I guess, comes from getting older, so we'll try to keep it focused. A lot of what has transpired, and what I use today, there's definitely been some luck involved, and that's I've identified that luck over time in many different areas. Starting with my parents, who were poor and had me when they were 20, wasn't on purpose, and I lived for 2 years in Iowa. So I was lucky to be born to my parents. The second thing is they moved to Boulder, Colorado when I was 2. So that was the big lucky move there, because I could have been in Iowa the rest of my life on a hog farm. And
luckily, we have no listeners in Iowa. So
yes, well, I still have family in Iowa. And my father was an entrepreneur, and he moved to Colorado to get involved in the ski industry, which was very nascent at the time in the mid-'60s. And so that's how I grew up, was in the ski industry, and still am a big skier now, and my family is as well.
Did you transition ever to snowboarding?
Yes, I did. I didn't transition. I became accomplished at that as well. And so I mostly ski now, but my kids are snowboarding naturally.
We older guys have to rep the snowboarding from time to time.
Yeah. I've got a custom-made snowboard from Arbor, one of the first ones they ever made.
Nice.
So I keep that around. But my father was an entrepreneur, and so he was in the ski industry for quite some time, and then he was in the restaurant business. And so, and my mother actually started an interior design company. So I never had an experience with a corporate environment of going to visit my mom or dad at a big office with a whole bunch of people. They were building these companies, and at the time, being an entrepreneur wasn't as incredible and sexy and cool as it is now, and everybody talks about. And venture was totally different. And my dad started his company, interest rates were 22%. So that was a lucky streak to get into Boulder, or to grow up in Boulder. And I ended up going to college at Michigan, another lucky break. Finished up at University of Denver. And I had always wanted to be in what I call business. I remember saying that to whoever asked. I said that to my dad. I just want to be in business. Well, business is a pretty broad term, and it kind of meant more than anything finance finance. My father started playing in the stock market, taught me about that, things like that. And when I was in college, Mike Milken was the thing. It was before he got in trouble.
And wasn't the thing.
Yes, before he got in trouble and wasn't the thing. I now know Mike Milken. I've told him this story. But he was really the reason I wanted to get into investment banking. And I started out working for commercial banking in Denver. I moved quickly to San Francisco and got into private equity there, a young private equity associate for a company called Sierra Capital. And that continued for the first 4 years out of college. And as I started to look at going to get a graduate degree, I wanted to differentiate myself. And so I went to a school called Thunderbird, American School of International Management. Very focused, the number one international business school at the time, very focused on international relations, business, finance, et cetera. And so I attended Thunderbird in 1990 and 1991. Right before I went, I took a 100-day trip in Europe, the proverbial backpack trip with a buddy of mine. I'd never been outside the country at that time. And
the quarter life crisis trip, or
just,
before that?
Hey, let's hit the streets. Yeah. And we were 25, so we weren't obviously teenagers doing the college trip. We actually had some money on our own that we'd made, and we wanted to see as much as we could. And we went to 16 different countries. And I ended up in France as the last place. We actually followed the Tour de France into Paris. And Paris was my last visit of the entire trip. At the end of August, first week of September, I'm at grad school. And the first thing they ask you is which language you're going to learn, because you have to come out of Thunderbird commanding a second language. And so they had Chinese and French and Spanish, et cetera. So I'm like, French, because I just come back from Paris and I thought it was awesome. So I took French. I finished up at Thunderbird. I studied in Paris, and then came out of there, and I was really focused on and interviewing with various investment banks in New York. The typical ones you can imagine. And I got a chance to meet an individual named Bill Daniels in Denver. Bill is known as the father of cable television. And he had started a firm in 1953 that got into cable TV. And then in 1958, he started an investment bank that was involved in all the M&A and raising equity and growing the cable industry, which Mike Milken eventually became involved in too. And they knew each other. But I got a lucky chance to meet him. Someone said, would you like to meet Bill Daniels? And at the time, it would be like growing up in Nebraska and somebody says, do you want to meet Warren Buffett? Literally. He was the richest man in Colorado at the time, et cetera. And you're like, how do you meet this person? How do you do that? Well, I have a connection. You should meet him. So I go in to meet him, and he's very famous swashbuckling person. Like, he was the first captain of the Blue Angels. He flew 246 missions. He'd started these companies. He'd become a billionaire, lost it all, bought a bunch of football teams, bought a race car team, bought all these things. So he was quite a unique person. And he was very tough and strong, but he wore these cream suits with a handkerchief, and he smoked cigarettes out of with the little long filter.
Yeah.
And you walk in and you're completely intimidated. I mean, I walked in and I don't know how I got through it. And we talked for about 40 minutes. And they were looking to bring on one of two things. They wanted to expand internationally. They'd never done deals internationally. And they were going to do it by buying a firm in London or Hong Kong is where they were thinking. Or in his words, he's like, we just hire a kid who'll go anywhere in the world. And I happened to walk in that week.
You were the kid.
Yeah. And he said, are you afraid of flying? All these questions that you probably can't ask today in interviews. And I somehow got through that. And as I walked out of his office, which is 50 yards, at the end of the world at the other side, he screams, he's not screams, but he goes, Mullen. And I turn around, he goes, I spent my whole life putting my name on this building. And it's this huge building in Denver with this literally Daniels on top. He goes, don't you mess it up.
Probably didn't use that word.
Correct. And I was like, okay, I'm not sure what that means. And I walked out, and then the rest is history. So he had hired me at that point. And that week, I flew to Guam and got involved in the very first transaction I was going to work on, which was selling the yellow pages, the radio stations, and the cable systems for a U.S. naval serviceman who stayed after the war and built this up on the island of Guam. So that began an incredible period of traveling worked on transactions in many different countries. But I started to get more involved in Europe. And because I had this French language ability, I started to focus on France, and then of course London, and things that were going on in England were very involved in the capital formation of the cable industry in Europe, which is much more behind the United States.
Like how many years behind were they?
This is 1993. For the EU had just been formed in 92, and that forced the governments to divest of all the assets. So at the time, the French government owned France Telecom, and France Telecom provided cable. But cable back then in Europe was like 12 channels. So a lot of U.S. capital and U.S. companies like Southwestern Bell and Liberty Media and U.S. West were all moving, Comcast, et cetera, were all trying to find assets and make investments internationally at this time. We kind of happened to be there, and we happened to know everybody because of, not from me necessarily, but because of all the history Bill and all the partners had being in that business. And one day I got a phone call back to the Lucky Breaks. An individual called into the main office in Denver and said, I'd like to talk to the father of cable TV, which is Bill. And the woman who's at the front desk says, well, we just hired this kid who speaks French. You want to talk to him? And he connects me to him. And his name's Patrick Drahi. And Patrick and I end up having a 20-year career. I'm now on the board of Patrick's company, which is the 4th largest cable company in the world. I really fast-forwarded through that, but I did massive, major transactions for him all over the world. And he was 1 year older than me. So had I not gone to Paris, that last stop on my trip, had I not gone to Thunderbird and learned French, never would have had this call, right? And what happened was that we ended up opening an office in Paris because of that, and I moved to France. And I lived in Paris for a couple of years. Fantastic time. Strange because I was by myself. I had an associate, but I was really building this thing by myself.
And I'm just trying to remember back in those days. I mean, the internet didn't really, that was sort of the beginning of, people realizing what you could do with this internet thing, right? And at this, but nobody was sure of the future of it. And at the same time, it was capital intensive to build
hugely
these out. So you're taking big risks and big bets.
We are both, but we were primarily the investment banker. So I would bring Blackstone and Carlyle over to spend $400 million on a project.
Right.
We were doing M&A between major entities and things like that. So we weren't ourselves putting in $400 million of capital.
But you were asking other companies to do that. Yeah,
for sure. And then I moved to London because the environment in France was negative against business. And we can talk about this as we get into Los Angeles a little bit. It's very hard to start a company. They kept harassing us even though we were generating revenue and paying taxes in France. And as great as France and Paris is, the real financial capital, of course, is in London. And so I moved to London, and lucky break number many, met my wife there, who's from LA, which is why I'm in LA. So we'll get to that. But I moved to London, and I remember I would go to internet cafes with a disc, download emails. For the 4 people I knew we even had an email address.
It was like Earthlink or AOL?
Well, it was internet cafe, UK internet, UK London.
So it was like specific
and I had
to that cafe.
I don't know if I had an AOL account or a Hotmail account. It was one of those two. And I was kind of this weird, cool guy, the younger guy at Daniels, who was trying to use emails. And I remember having this conversation with our CFO/COO. I said, we need to get email for everybody. She's like, never. Never. That was probably 90.
She's probably right.
That was 95.
Yeah.
I think by 96 we were all on the internet,
yeah.
Right? So I moved to London. Like I said, I met my wife, stayed there for a while. We eventually moved back to Denver for a couple of years, really to reconnect with my partners and Bill, et cetera. And then I moved. Bill actually died in 2000. He was 81, so I caught him at the twilight of his career. And we moved to New York City where we already had an office. So I moved to New York City, May of 01. 4 months before 9/11. So went through that whole process and that pain, and stayed in New York for 6 years. We had our first child there, and as I said before, I grew up in Boulder. My wife's from LA. We're Western people, wanted to be near the families, so we moved to Los Angeles at the end of '06. We ended up selling all of Daniels in 2007. We sold all the assets we owned. We started Prime Ticket, for example, here in LA. Bill had $4 billion by the time we sold everything, and it was given all to charity, which is called the Daniels Foundation, which gives money to underprivileged children who get into college on their own. We pay for their college education. And so we sold the firm in the beginning of '07 to RBC Capital Markets. And RBC, as you may know, is one of the largest banks in the world. Very good people. They're much more Midwestern, which is probably a little bit more of our value stream coming out of Denver. They were not involved in the mortgage crisis, so we kind of lucked out there and survived by being bought by RBC. And I stayed with them for 3 years, which was my duty and lockup as a senior partner of the firm, not the senior partner, as a senior partner of the firm. And that ended at the beginning of 2010, which is when I went to work for the city of LA.
If you've ever met a famous athlete at a corporate event or gotten an official autograph, chances are Steiner Sports made it happen. Here's Brandon Steiner.
We believe that there's magic in the moments that sports creates. We get customers closer to the game and help companies use the power of sports to grow their business. We've been in business 30 years, and we've had multiple systems to keep track of all the athletes and all of our customers. Multiple systems means multiple headaches. So we made the move to NetSuite by Oracle. NetSuite lets us replace all of our finance, inventory, and CRM functions with one convenient system. Now all the departments can see the same data. And if I have a question about our business, I can get the answer quickly.
This month, NetSuite is offering a free 60-minute business review with an expert in your industry to identify opportunities to turbocharge your growth. To get your free review, go to netsuite.com/Steiner. That's netsuite.com/Steiner. netsuite.com/Steiner.
So here you are involved in investment banking
And investment, yeah.
and investment for all of these years, and you decide or ask to become COO of Los Angeles. What is, I didn't even know that title existed.
Well, we made it up, and then I don't think it's been resurrected. So
They broke the mold.
there's a gentleman by the name of Austin Beutner here in Los Angeles who currently is the superintendent of LASD. Austin was one of the youngest partners of Blackstone, and then went to work for the Clinton administration. When Glasnost happened in 1994, he was tasked with moving to Russia and building all the investments that the U.S. was doing in Russia at the time. And he stayed over there. He came back and started an investment bank called Evercore, which currently today is a big public, very successful investment bank. He broke his neck mountain biking in 1997 and decided at that point, I don't need to be doing this. I want to focus on my family and chill a little bit. And he left investment banking. He and I had done a deal in the 90s in Belgium. So we had stayed in touch. Our kids ended up going to preschool together. And he was itching. He's a very philanthropic guy and very likes to have massive challenges. Hence the LASD thing right now. But he was being courted to be number 2 behind Geithner at the Fed at the time. Again, this is 2009. And he and I were chatting because we're friends, and he's like, you're gonna be bored soon. I know you're leaving. We've been talking about leaving. What are we gonna do next? Let's go start a fund. Let's be private equity. Let's do all these things. Like, why don't we do something totally different? And what the city of LA was trying to do, and it was the billionaires of LA, Eli Broad and all that cabal that runs the city, was trying to emulate what Michael Bloomberg had done in New York. So when he was elected mayor, he appointed several private sector people into the government. In particular, Dan Doctoroff, who was at the time, I think, president of Bloomberg, the company. He made him first deputy mayor, and that was a title that was made up.
Right.
And so Villagrosa and the city appointed Austin first deputy mayor. He basically said, Mullen, do you want to be my number 2? We'll make it up as we go.
Right.
Figure out what we're going to do. We had a lot of ideas and intentions, but the real point of the whole thing coming together was to try to instill a little bit more of a business-friendly culture into the government. LA has predominantly and historically been anti-business, strangely.
What is it because of it's so sprawled, or because of Hollywood's influence, or
I think we could go. I can't really pinpoint it. It's just governments in general are anti-business, have been accused of being anti-business, right? The city of LA has long been a union city, more than most, but I can't pinpoint the exact reason. But if you recall, in 2009-10, we were really in a recession, and the only way to come out of a recession or to enhance the economy they're in is to create jobs. All these other things, do whatever you want, but if people aren't working, then that hurts the entire environment. If people aren't working, they're paying less taxes. If we're paying less taxes, we have less money for schools. It is all tied together, and it's all tied to creating a job. And if you're not business friendly, meaning you're not creating an environment for companies to start and build businesses or to enhance or grow their existing businesses, then they will leave. Even now, look, there's 3 Fortune 100 companies in total in Los Angeles. I can't remember who they are anymore. Disney, yeah. That's it. Because over time, the aerospace industry left, a whole bunch of other industries left. So the attempt was let's try to bring in some private sector. Let's create a more working environment to help create jobs. So
the defense industry a lot of it was here too, mostly because of the Air Force
and aeronautics and stuff like that. Yeah.
Right. So you had Boeing and Lockheed and companies like that.
Right.
Those are not, I imagine those are not the stalwarts of Los Angeles business.
Not anymore, no. There's JPL. I mean, to be honest, SpaceX has filled that void very well. I mean, Tesla has. I mean, people are somewhat at times critical, of course, of Elon and what they're trying to do. At the end of the day, we should be like supporting him and others like him as much as possible, because they're creating incredible amount of jobs and PR and stuff
right
in Southern California.
Traffic.
Well, he's trying to get rid of that, but I mean, no one can. I don't know who you blame for traffic. That's for sure. But an example is, and you'd have to go back, but to open a restaurant in the city of LA. And by the way, we're sitting in Santa Monica. We're not in LA. We're not in the city of LA.
Right.
Taxes that go to the city of LA do not cover Santa Monica. But every Santa Monica resident lives off of DWP, the Port of Los Angeles, and LAX. Those are all assets that are owned by the city of LA, which taxpayers of the city of LA pay for, not Santa Monica. So when any resident from Santa Monica lands and they come in, they're like, God, LAX, such a pain. It's not, what are you doing about it? So we can go off to that tangent if you'd like. But so what we really wanted to focus on at the city was as I mentioned, DWP is owned by the city of LA. It's the largest power and water company in the United States, owned by a municipality by 4 times.
Wow.
It's a $5 billion revenue company. If you were to separate it and call it a company, it's $5 billion in revenues. The Port of Los Angeles, combined with the Port of Long Beach, is the second largest port in the United States.
What's the first?
I believe it's either New Jersey or Atlanta. I think it's New Jersey, New York. LAX, we all know, is 3rd or 4th largest airport in the United States, also a $5 billion revenue business.
And all these businesses are part of running Los Angeles.
Yes, they are funding Los Angeles, right? They're funding a lot of things because they're huge, massive businesses. But it's not really normal for cities to own these assets. Most states and governments have divested of these. These are privately run operations. And what we wanted to do was take those assets, call them assets of the city of LA, not just cash, just cash generators for the city. But let's call these assets. Let's take those assets, force them to do business in Los Angeles, hire Angelinos, and create jobs, which increases the revenue base, which increases everything. And so before we kind of before Austin agreed to go down there, he identified the assets of the city, which were the three I mentioned, plus all of building and safety and planning, which is all the real estate functions of the city, which is a huge revenue generator for the city. You can't walk into downtown and try to do any type of real estate function without paying a fee. Like, you almost can't walk in the door. You have your wallet out by the time you walk in. So we also added to that the convention center, which we own. It's another revenue generator for the city. We added homeless and housing because it's all tied together. Real estate, homeless and housing should be tied together, and a couple other assets. And we didn't get involved necessarily in the police or the fire or the schools. Don't take it the wrong way. They're certainly assets of the city, but they're not revenue generating assets of the city. And I can't force the police department to
make money,
to hire people, right? That was the hope and intention. We went down totally neutral. We spent a lot of time meeting with every city council member and just saying, I know we live in the Palisades, but we're not going to spend any time on the West Side. The Palisades and the Riviera and Brentwood, they don't need us. Other areas of the city of LA could take our help. And so we focused on that a lot. And that's really was the premise and hope of getting involved in that. Why did I do it? I just worked hard for 20 plus years. I had wanted to take a break from traveling. I wanted to do something new. I believe a lot in Austin. He's an incredible person, so I wanted to have a chance to work with him and follow him. And it was a unique opportunity for me to get involved in LA where I wasn't really. As I mentioned, I moved here in 2006. I traveled all the time to Europe doing deals there. I didn't make any relationships here. Wasn't trying to.
Right.
So it was a great time to get involved and understand what LA was.
So in that time, what would you call some of the signature wins of that administration?
I committed a year. It sounds silly. It was volunteer. We didn't want to be paid because if we're going to be paid, we don't want the city paying us, right? So I committed a year. I stayed for 16 months. Austin committed a year, stayed for about 19 months. We were involved in a lot of stuff that really, we got pulled into everything. Just ask Mark, ask Austin. They'll work on that. They'll work on it. So we got taken away from some of the areas of focus we wanted to be in. But a couple things that I think are important and interesting as we see what's happening in this economy right now, particularly in Santa Monica. The city of LA has a gross revenues tax, and it's based on what I just said. So if Amazon had opened their headquarters in LA, they pay 0.05% of their revenues as a tax to the city just to be here. Has nothing to do with profitability. How many people you have, it's how much revenue you generate. So Amazon could be generating $100 billion and they'd be paying the city basically a tax on that. And as you know, Amazon is people and computers. It's not products. No one's making anything. So those businesses, and many businesses now in Southern California, can flee at any time to anywhere. And so we were losing a lot of businesses to Texas, for example. The governor was here a lot. He's meeting with companies, pulling them down. LegalZoom moved to Texas, a bunch of stuff like that. And we had this incredibly regressive tax on revenues. And what people didn't quite grasp is that the company could leave the city of LA and go over to even Culver City is actually not part of the city of LA. Oh, wow. Culver City is Culver City. Culver City doesn't have a gross revenues tax. So if you're a company
like Apple,
what's that?
Like Apple?
Yeah. If you're a company with 40 employees, let's say it's small for now, and you just sign a lease over in Culver City and move over there. Huh. Because why? Because it's people and computers. It's not everything was so antiquated. They had a steamship tax. They had all these taxes that had never been removed. And so we rewrote, and Garcetti was involved in this, we helped rewrite the internet tax law, which actually took that away, because we argued successfully that you cannot tax, this is the future of the economy, and you cannot tax it that way.
Right.
So that's one of the things we accomplished. We also set up a 3-year tax break for companies that moved into Los Angeles. So if you moved into LA, you also didn't have to pay taxes for 3 years. So we were just trying to we didn't have any money. Like Texas would pay you to move.
Right.
I'm not picking on Texas, but other states would pay you to move and still do. City of LA doesn't have money to be giving away like that. And so I think the mentality was, we're LA, people are just going to come here and stay. And we were losing a lot of people. And again, we were really in a recession at the time. So we were trying to create things around the fringes that caused or created an environment that allowed companies to think they could build and grow here.
Did it work?
Well, I don't know what the tangible evidence is, but I can say it had to. Some of it has to have. Because I don't have the numbers. Somebody have to show me how many companies moved here and what the revenues would have been. But all the city, and to be fair, the city employees that we had to deal with, which was the finance department, all they cared about was the revenue leaving. So in their minds, they're like, well, wait, we make $40 million a year from that. We're going to make 35 only. And we're like, yeah, but it's never coming back.
Right.
So you need to make a change to keep that 35. And there was a lot of cultural, massaging going on there. The city's also been very difficult, and Santa Monica is as well, in terms of allowing and helping companies open a restaurant, for example. It's very hard and takes a long time to get all the proper paperwork to open a restaurant. It shouldn't.
Yeah.
Real estate takes a long time, but the real estate firms, they really run the city.
And in that time, and I just want to kind of end with what we're seeing in Los Angeles now. So much is changing. I mean, downtown has been revitalized. It's, speaking of New York, it's what happened in Times Square and making that a safe place to be. Downtown is certainly a lot safer now than it was 5 years ago.
Parts of it, yeah.
The transportation, we've got subways, trains that take us all the way out here to Santa Monica. There's more coming. Certainly the Olympics, and there's even more transportation coming and infrastructure to support the city, but that will also benefit things like the Olympics, which will hopefully bring in revenue as well. So, do you think that at least you were only there for 16 months, but that administration laid the groundwork for that?
Well, Antonio, I think was 04 was his first, or 05 was his first year. And so definitely he was a little bit more forward thinking than the past had been in terms of trying to take on some of the major problems we had. For example, building the train from Santa Monica, et cetera. And so they certainly have some wins under their belt. I think everything is driven by the economy. Everything is driven by the economy, meaning when he came in 05, 06, the economy was like this. And you can get approvals, you can make changes, you can hide things when the economy is like this. When the economy is not like that, everything comes under a high level of scrutiny. In fairness to Antonio, Garcetti started in 2013. This is the economy since he started, right? And so we don't know until the economy has a problem, really what problems have been fixed, what problems have been created.
Right.
But there is a relationship to the general economy, and we know this now. We've had a 10-year run, right? And I think the development, the growth in West Hollywood, the growth in Santa Monica, the growth in downtown LA, Culver City's blown up, El Segundo. Incredible growth has happened in Los Angeles, driven not by a government, driven by entrepreneurs and the companies themselves and people.
Right.
Right.
Yeah. So you leave that role, and it's time to move on. Mm-hmm. What do you do next?
So back to kind of the business side of the career. I had been investing personally in various different things as a banker for Bill. We invested in companies ourselves, but I also invested in companies personally. I also invested in venture capital firms personally, as well as private equity firms, because we had all these relationships. And we saw a lot of deals, and sometimes we'd invest and sometimes we wouldn't. Most of the time we wouldn't. And I had created this track record that I kept in an entity called Mullen Capital. And the track record was very strong, luckily. And I always knew I wanted to get back into capital. I will never work for anybody. I only worked for Bill. And his number two is Brian Devey, who's a good friend of mine, an investor in my fund. Like, that was it.
Right.
So I'm never going to work for anybody. I'm unemployable, right, as they say. And so I knew I had to start something on my own. My strength was in capital, relationships, formation, analysis, finance, et cetera. I had noticed that there was very little capital here in Southern California. Even though there's more now, it's still quite small compared to, let's say, New York and San Francisco, of course. There was a lot of people. There's tons of businesses. There's tons of entrepreneurship. LA was built by entrepreneurs. That's really got a history of that. People moving west and starting whatever they could find. That's what happened. That's how LA was created. And so there's a lot of personality from that perspective here, but very little capital. And as someone who's sitting on the catbird seat at the city of LA and understanding the environment here and how many businesses were out there and what was happening, I felt like I could start a venture capital fund. And I wanted to start small to test it. And so I raised my first fund in 2012. And I'm
under your own name?
Under Double M Capital.
Okay.
I'm the largest investor, but I have 32 other investors. And the strategy at the time was to focus on entities that were doing what we call B2B, business-to-business services. Whether it was software or not was not necessarily particularly defined, but providing services to other businesses was something I felt more comfortable with and how I felt comfortable with in terms of analyzing if it had potential. The next app, mobile app, or the next entertainment thing or the next influencer thing, I had no feel for.
You just didn't have the history in it?
Didn't have the history, wasn't, this is 2011, the iPhone had only been around for 3 years, and I just don't have that, didn't feel comfortable with my own intuition on the consumer focus and how business is going to be successful from a consumer investment perspective. And so I focused on B2B, software, infrastructure, technology platforms, Southern California, seed investment.
So
the seed was forced by the size of the fund.
So early stage, what size investments were you typically making?
So I made anywhere between $100,000 to $500,000 investments in the first fund.
Gotcha. And you said that that's kind of was forced by the size of the fund, but what were you looking for on the exit side?
Well, the exit side is always a hope for, wish for, lucky outcome. You can't identify it, but I will say in my defense that I've done transactions in 30 different countries. I am very good at M&A and understanding some of the things that are necessary to make a company successful and how to sell it. I don't think it's quantifiable, meaning I know what's going to happen to that company because I've been doing this forever. I can't say that, but I do have a different viewpoint. And so when I do look at companies, I have intuition and guts that say that this has a chance and this is who this is going to be acquired by. We'll see if that happens. It has happened quite a bit. Fund 1 has been a stellar performer. We've returned almost 3 times everybody's money, and we still have a bunch of companies left. Fund 2 was raised in 2014, bigger fund, more investors, bigger investors. Checks started between $500 to $750 to $1 million. And the intention was always to grow the platform. And in order to grow the platform, you need people. And in particular, I needed a partner, or I wanted to have a partner. But finding a partner after being partners with a bunch of people for 20 years and selling the business and making money, and now, as I said, never working for anybody, is not you don't get a bunch of resumes and go, this one looks pretty good. It has to be a very almost organic process. And I lucked out from the perspective of my partner's name is Jim Andelman. And Jim and I met in 2011 because we were both investors in the same company. We meet in a boardroom. Hey, how you doing? Nice to meet you. What do you do? I have this fund. Jim has been running these funds in Santa Barbara called Rincon Venture Partners. In 2014, he approached me. He said, do you want to maybe partner up and raise a fund? I said, I just raised my second fund. I went to him in beginning of 16, go, I'm getting ready to raise fund 3. Do you want to join? He's like, I just raised my second fund, And so the timing finally worked, but it allowed he and I to get to know each other over 6 years and different investments in different boardrooms. And we'd been in like 6 or 7 of the same investments. We had similar investors. We actually had one investor in particular who's the same, who's a very big investor now in our fund. And it really came together in terms of us being able to just talk about it a lot more, understand the person, and because it is a marriage, and understand the person a little bit better before we made that type of commitment. Because now we've raised this bonfire fund. I mean, we're committed for 12 years together. I mean, I guess I could leave tomorrow, but that would
could
create
could have a midlife crisis.
Yes, that could create a lot of problems for a lot of people, and that's not our intention.
Yeah.
Want to help save the planet? Here's an idea. Go nude. Unfortunately, not wearing clothes isn't realistic for most of us, but buying sustainable clothing is. Here's Gordon Seabury, CEO of Toad & Co.
Few know that garment production can generate tremendous pollution. So that's why we're hellbent on offering cleaner, sustainably made clothing that's stylish and long-lasting. But that's only half the battle at Toad & Co. When it comes to hitting our business goals, we've learned to focus on what we're good at and seek partners for other areas of expertise. So when it came to ensuring a consistent customer experience across all sales channels and knowing what was going on with all aspects of our business, we chose NetSuite by Oracle. They know business systems, we know eco-friendly clothes. A perfect match.
From accounting and finance to commerce and human resources, NetSuite is the #1 business system to help you simply manage your business. Right now, go to netsuite.com/toad to get your free guide, Crushing the 5 Barriers to Growth. That's netsuite.com/toad for your free guide and to hear Gordon bear all on Toad & Co.'s growth story.
You know, before we get into a little bit of the strategy that you have, like just the landscape of investment from a VC standpoint, what has changed now versus, you know, years back in the cable days, but even, you know.
Well, you hear this often, which is it's a lot easier and cheaper to start a company now because everything is in the cloud.
Right.
There's a lot less capital-intensive businesses. You can start a business with a computer and a person. That is all true. And what that's allowed is a lot more companies to be formed because there is only so much capital, but a lot more companies to be formed. The amount of capital, in particular in Southern California, has dramatically increased. So, for example, in 2010 or 11, roughly $300 million was invested in the venture market in Southern California. Sorry. $700 million total was invested in Southern California, $400 million from outside investors, $300 million from Southern California investors, right? That includes healthcare and bio and everything. Fast forward to last year, it was about $450 million invested by Southern California investors. So, okay, 50% increase. $5 billion invested by outside investors.
Wow.
So there's been a tenfold on the outside and only 1.5-fold on the inside. And what that shows to me is 2 things. One is there's still not a lot of capital here, but 2 is the market in LA has arrived. Like people are trying to do investments. Now, of course, Snapchat and things like that helps, but there's been massive amount of capital put into the Southern California market from outside VCs. And that's changed dramatically since when I started investing in 2012. As seed investors here, and there's other great funds here, if you know Mucker and Crosscut and others like that. There's great seed, small fund investors here. We all need money from outside for our companies. There's just nobody here writing big checks. Up front, can only write so many checks, first of all. And secondly, they're a $400 million fund. It's actually not that big compared to, there's probably 50 $400 million funds in San Francisco.
Right.
So we all have to rely and we have to go get the money from San Francisco and New York and some other places. That's become easier. We have a much higher profile in the stack of capital and interesting companies than we've ever had. There's a bigger, much broader focus on companies starting in Southern California. There is a big focus on, hey, we have Harvey Mudd, USC, UCLA, Loyola, Caltech, number one. We have incredible number of engineers being thrown out of the colleges here. When we first were in the government, we did a study and we found that about 30% of all engineers that were coming out of these schools stayed in Southern California. Anecdotally, we think it's about 60 to 65% now are staying here. Why? Because there's just opportunities. Like, you had to go to San Francisco because that's where the job was.
Right.
Now you walk down Main Street and run into 50 companies, or else you go into Culver City or Santa Monica, right? Or downtown LA is blowing up. So there's so much more opportunity than there ever has been, and chances. Couple that with the environment, which if you're 22 and coming out of college, you feel much more comfortable, I think, trying to be an entrepreneur because it's much more accepted. It's cool too.
Yeah. Well, certainly from the time when your parents were starting businesses, that was out of necessity. This is out of, it might be fun to do.
Yeah.
And I'm 22. What do I have to lose?
Exactly.
But I would imagine that the infusion of both opportunity and capital also increases the risk of failure.
Mm-hmm. There are a lot of companies being funded that shouldn't be. And that's just not an LA thing, though.
Sure.
But I would imagine you almost cannot start a company today that's unique. It's primarily execution. It's very hard to start a company that has technology that no one else can touch. Just look at Uber, the most successful private company in the world. They have Lyft. There's companies all over the world that are competing with them. So execution is so important. And what I'm finding is that while we all want to invest in the Mark Zuckerbergs and Evan Spiegels of the world, who came straight out of college and became billionaires, that is so rare, it's crazy, right?
Well, I wanted to talk about that. Like in the world of B2B, I was trying to think back to what are the unicorns of that industry, and it's almost like, maybe I'm wrong. You can correct me if I am. I don't remember the last one.
Well, Twilio, MongoD, Lynda.com. I could go through a long list. There were, from 2005 to 2015 to 2017, there were 13 venture-backed B2B IPOs, which was compared to 4 consumer-backed IPOs.
Wow.
Certainly a lot of evidence I could provide you if you wanted, but it is much greater than you think. And in addition to that, there's quite a lot of M&A, right? The company Qualtrics in Utah just got acquired for $6 billion right before it went public. It's in Utah.
Right.
$400 million in revenue business. So there's tons of those companies. If you looked at my portfolio, you probably haven't heard of any of them because they're not consumer facing. If you're not using the service and you're not really 100% focused on understanding the venture capital environment and what companies are being built, there's thousands of companies I read about every day and some of the news I've never heard of.
Right.
And they just raised $100 million.
Right. Well, they're focused on a very specific problem that only applies to that industry or certain people in that industry.
Right.
So when you're looking at that, that yes, you have a track record and a history in this world, but when you get so far down into those niches, how do you figure out what's going to work and what's not?
Well, the past tense would be we won't know till it happens, till it works, right? So how do we make a decision that this might work? I think is what you're getting at. And from our perspective, this is just Bonfire. We focus on Southern California. We focus on seed, post-revenue. We plan on leading most of our deals. So each barrier that I just created 4 barriers for me to even look at a company.
Right.
And that narrows our scope of focus and narrows how many companies we can talk to. But once we get down to that group, through the funnel, for example, we've already identified companies that meet a lot of requirements that we feel comfortable with, that we have seen in the past that have come through. Now we're really making a bet on 2 things. One is the ability of that management team to execute, the ability of that management team to be something special. That's a historical perspective you can look at, but it's really getting to know them and hoping. Okay?
So how much time do you take to get to know them? I mean, they're post-revenue, so they have a business model.
Yes.
And they have customers.
Yes.
Right? So you know that you can look at that, but then you're really talking about yet another form of marriage,
Yep.
right? Getting to know them and how they, like you said, their ability to execute. What steps do you take to do
Well,
that?
one thing that we are lucky with on the B2B side is that most 24-year-olds aren't starting a B2B company.
It's not cool.
Yeah, we'll leave it at that. But they don't have experience. Like maybe they went to work for NetSuite for a year and a half. That doesn't really prepare them to start a company. And so the general population of founders that we get a chance to meet are a little bit older and have been around a little bit longer with more experience. And so you have a little bit more of a track record to verify and to think about. You have the ability to, yes, I don't get to know these people for 3 years before I invest.
Right.
It's maybe 3 weeks to 3 months before we invest. So we do have to make some quick calls. It's but validation with the current customers. That's why we want customers. We're not going to just base it on a plan. Validation of prior track record, validation of personality, validation of references, and validation of our own experience. So coming back to my own track record and history, as I've said, I've been around. I've been to 30 different countries. All I did was work with entrepreneurs. Outdoor advertising people, wireless spectrum people, cable television people, telecom people from many different countries. So I've seen so many different flavors and had so much experience with different entrepreneurs that I actually feel very comfortable, betting on my own gut instinct on a person, which is a big part of the battle. Like you got to have conviction on who you're backing. But then I went to work for this crazy, uncredible entrepreneur himself. My parents were entrepreneurs. I've been around. Then I went to work for the city of LA. I had a staff of 44 people working for me. You want to talk about different temperaments, talents, and convictions? Those 44 people versus pick any 44 that I worked with in investment banking in London?
Yeah.
Completely different world, right? Completely different demographics, education, but I still had to motivate and work with them and understand them and reward and be a team partner to those people. So I learned a lot as a person in those 16 months in terms of how to, I basically just broadened my circle of experience. And so Jim has been around for a long time. He's done software investing for almost 20 years. The two of us together are kind of frickin' frack in terms of some things we actually are good at and focus on, so that's worked out very well. But we, at the end of the day, kind of sit at each other and go, you think she's got it?
Right. But what I haven't heard you talk about, and I'm not saying you don't think about.
I'm avoiding it.
Yeah,
No, I'm joking.
Like so if you get into, like you said, I hadn't heard of a lot of the companies that you guys have funded, but if you get involved with a company that does, some new thing in supply chain management or some sort of distribution network that they're creating some new business model around, is that, I mean, obviously you have to feel comfortable with that, but what you've been talking about is comfort with the person and their ability to execute, sort of divorced from the idea itself.
Yes. Because I think you can come up with the greatest idea and not be able to execute on it because you don't know what you're doing. And you don't have the ability to identify and articulate the vision of the company. And you need to do that not just for the investors, but for your employees. It's incredible to me how many, for example, I have two companies here you may have heard of, Chow Now and Inspire Energy. Inspire has 200 employees. You probably haven't even heard of them. They're doing $100 million of revenues. He doesn't care. They're focused on their customers and growing the company. They're not focused on going to VC dinners and being cool in Santa Monica. Love that, right? But when I go over to that company and I grab any one of his employees, they have a mantra of 5 things they focus on, and they can all recite it. And they look at him as a visionary leader, and he's executed the business plan that he said he was going to do, and he's built this incredible team. Chow Now's done the same thing. I've been with those guys since they were the first month of their company, 2 people. Now I have 140 people. I just find it impressive and amazing that there's 138 people who are generally younger and coming out of college, or not necessarily coming out of college, but that are enticed and excited enough by these individuals to actually follow them into battle. It's really amazing. And that's happening all over. It's just not, I just picked 2, for example. And so the ability for the founder to articulate and demonstrate the vision and how they're going to execute on it matters a lot. Julie Capistrone, I think you interviewed her.
Yes.
Yeah, I'm an investor personally. Okay. She's awesome, right? You can see how she could encourage and entice employees to work for her because they're excited for what they're going to accomplish. There are plenty of people that have good ideas, no ability to do that. They're like, hey, I've got this idea, it's pretty cool. I'm okay. Well, that's not going to work.
How involved do you stay in the business? I mean, it sounds like you make lots of visits and talk to the people there, but when I think of seed round funding, I think of, companies that start to grow, get other forms of capital, and everybody wants to have their input, give their advice, play their role. What role do you see Bonfire and yourself playing in these companies you invest in?
Right. So the typical investment round that we'll do in the seed area is a company's raising, let's say, $2 to $2.5 million. That's a more of a traditional sized early stage seed round. We're going to write a $1.25 to $1.5 million check. We lead most of our deals. We don't do work. We don't take anybody else's work. We don't invest $250,000 in party rounds. We don't get it. And when I get a deal that says, "Hey, we're just looking for somebody to fill in 300, 400, we've already done other work," we don't even look at it. To be honest, we do all our own work. We lead most of our deals, and we take board seats on most of our companies. And we intend to be priced out and thrown out of the board probably around the B round.
Okay.
Just because we have to recycle ourselves.
Sure.
Here you've got some big investors. They want to be involved. They're really good at the B series. They're way better than us. We did what we were supposed to do, which we're very good at helping companies get to that next stage and helping them raise capital. And we're going to go back to the next investment we make. So we get very involved. So it's another barrier as you go through all the things that we're trying to focus on, how we get to our portfolio construction.
And so in that early phase, you say that's the part we're good at. Mm-hmm. What's the stuff that you do? What's the magic you help get them to that next stage?
Again, you have to give a little bit of credit for all the deals we've done and been involved in the past. So we've seen it almost all. I've had I had a CEO in our office a month ago. Deal was falling apart. Literally couldn't stop rubbing his forehead from stress, and I was just like, "My man, I've seen this happen 50 times. We're gonna be fine. We're gonna do this." Is like, how do you even know that? So we're adults, and that helps a lot.
Yeah,
we know everybody in the VC industry for raising capital. We know how to structure things. We know how to present things. We know how to create decks. We work with them on how to create board decks that are professional. One of our venture partners was the 40th employee at Salesforce.com. He's a SaaS master. So all 3 of us are very good at creating, identifying the funnel, the demand generation platform, when you're supposed to hire a VP of sales, how many SDRs per VP of sales, what the cost is you should be paying these people. Pick any function, and we're very good at that as well. We're very good at understanding what hurdles and metrics the company needs to hit to make sure that they're on track. Because a new company may go out and say, "We did $7,000 in revenue this month." You're like, that is awesome or terrible, depending on what the business is and how they've done it. We've just seen all that stuff. What we're trying to create on the Bonfire side, we want to own the signal of being the B2B signal caller in Southern California. Now, we do deals in San Francisco, about 20%, and we do another 10% outside of San Francisco and LA, outside of the state, really, in situations that are unique, where we knew the founders before, or we knew a venture capitalist that's involved with the company, and we trust that person. But if you focus on the companies on here, we want to own, and we're trying to earn, that if you're a company that's got some revenue, you've got some traction, you're B2B focused, software, SaaS, etc., you're in Southern California, and you're raising money, two things have to happen. You have to talk to us, because we should be your first call. But secondly, if we say no, and you go to another venture capitalist and they say, did you talk to Mullen? Did you talk to Bonfire? That person, if they say no, they're like, why not? Do you want to meet them? And if they say, and the person says yes, then the tree goes, and what they say, and he says, well, Bonfire is very interested. That other VC should go, me too.
Yeah.
But if the VC says, did you talk to Bonfire, and what they say, and that person says, they said no, we don't want to cause that commotion, but we do want to own that signal.
Yeah. So just circling back to the beginning, you talked about your parents, and really, you talked about luck, but I mean, I would say a lot of luck is born out of necessity of situations. There's a lot of organic things that can happen, but your parents created businesses because they were interested, because it's what they needed to do to put food on the table. Right. Do you think we're ever going to get back to a point where people starting companies for that reason, rather than, well, it's cool, or I could make a heck of a lot of money?
Well, you've opened up a little bit of a can of worms here, because we're sitting here talking about the VC industry. The VC industry is puny compared to the rest of the world. The only reason we're talking about it is because we're in it. Right. It's so small. The amount of, if you go to New York and talk to an investment banker or a financier or a private equity person, they don't know anybody in VC except maybe Mark Andreessen, because they've heard about him, or Bill Gurley. I'm not joking.
Yeah. It's not the world they run in.
It's not the world they run in. What they do is so much bigger, so much more capital. What I've heard before is that of all the capital out there being invested, wealth funds, private equity, hedge funds, etc., ventures 1% of that.
Wow.
So we all live in a very myopic world, whether it's in LA or San Francisco. So we have two myopic worlds. One, we're in LA, and two is we're only focused on VC. Very small. So I would argue that 95+% of companies are started because they're trying to make money.
Right. Well, and that, what percentage is like the bootstrap, friends and family, I just need a little bit of money to get this started?
95%.
Yeah.
More than that.
Part of that.
I had a founder in my office this morning. This may sound weird. I try to talk people out of taking VC. When I can see that they're building a business that could be successful, that will make money, that is moving towards profitability, and will be blown up by trying to take VC money. And they will also perhaps not be able to raise it, and then be shattered. Just silly.
Yeah.
There's so many businesses that have been started, particularly in LA. There's tons and tons of family-owned software businesses that were started from scratch that are now converting to cloud. They were old software businesses converting to cloud. Never needed VC money.
Right.
VC is just it's a funny little chest-pounding industry.
Yeah. Well, so listeners, if you need money, raise it yourself. But if you need VC money, seed money, go to Bonfire, go to Mark Mullen. Thanks for joining us today.
Thanks. Thank you very much.
Did you hear that? All of you people looking for funding, Mark Mullen says that one of the qualities he looks for when he's investing in a founder is his or her ability to communicate the company's vision and quickly. Make sure you practice that in the mirror before your next pitch.
Yes.
Do you practice stuff in the mirror?
Yes.
In the mirror?
I practice in the mirror.
I can't do it in the mirror.
I thought I told you that because, so Fritz and I did this, kind of tour with GrowWire and everything else, and we had to ask some questions, do some interviews in front of an audience, and I told you I thought that I practiced in front of a mirror, and I was a little embarrassed because I had one of our colleagues staying in my hotel room.
Well,
she witnessed it.
So it was like you had two people in your audience.
Yeah.
Yourself and her.
She gave me the thumbs up. She gave me some good feedback though. So that was actually positive instead of me looking at myself in the mirror criticizing.
Well, we want to thank Mark for joining us on this episode of the Grow Wire podcast. I also want to shout out to everyone who made it possible, our sponsors over at the Second City, Steiner Sports, and Toad & Co., as well as our editing crew over at Lampstand, and you, our producer, Kendall Fisher. Thank you, Kendall.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.
You just listened to the Grow Wire podcast with host Fritz Nelson. Make sure to keep tuning in for more episodes full of tips, tools, stories, and strategies to help take your personal and professional growth to the next level. Until next time.